Hi, everybody. We're back talking about metaphysics, and the question that we've been looking at this week has to do with the nature of reality. As we've noted previously, a lot of us have this natural intuition that reality is primarily material, that the only things that exist are physical in nature, right? We call this philosophy materialism. While on the other hand, there are those that say, no, there's something more than the physical in reality. And in fact, there may only be something that's not physical. Maybe all of this physicality is really an illusion or false perception. What's most real is something that's immaterial, right? We saw that last class when we looked at idealist philosophies. Well, today we'll take a look at an argument against materialism based upon consciousness, based upon awareness and subjective experience. And I had you begin by reading this short science fiction story, Made Out of Meat. So what do you think? What's the point of the story? Right? We have these aliens that come by the Earth and are astounded and aghast at what they think are conscious beings. Now, why were they so surprised? It's because the form these conscious beings took, the form, they said, was meat. How strange is it that meat has a mind? Well, what's this story about then? It's pointing to the really odd notion that immaterial substance can eventually develop awareness. If you take a look at all the things that we see on Earth, right? All the trees and plants and animals and us, we come from the Earth, which basically means we come from dirt stuff. We come from the same stuff that dirt is. Well, just imagine shaking dirt for, a long time. What we're saying is that eventually when we shake dirt long enough, it eventually says, "Hey, how you doing?" It eventually goes, "Let's take a philosophy class. Let's ponder the nature of the mind." And to the aliens, that seems weird. That dirt stuff, that meat stuff developed a mind, developed consciousness. And if we really think about it, I mean, isn't that weird? Isn't that weird that dirt eventually developed awareness? That something that doesn't have awareness could develop it? Well, let's ask ourselves a basic question first about the mind. What is this thing that we're talking about? It might be easier to think about what the mind is by asking ourselves, okay, if minds did not exist, what else would not exist? If there are no minds, maybe there would be no dreams, no hopes and aspirations. There are no minds, there would be no sounds, right? Because there would be sound waves, but there'd be nothing to experience those sound waves as sounds, which means maybe there's no music, no songs, there's no colors, right? Because if it's only physical things that exist, then it would be electromagnetic waves that exist, but it's the mind's perception of those electromagnetic waves that produces the experience of colors, right? Which means what? No paintings, no art, creativity, no philosophy, no memories, no ideas. So does this give us a sense for what maybe the mind does for us? Well, philosophers have been, interested in the mind for a very long time and interested in consciousness. And as science has, progressed and matured, we've started to answer a lot of questions people have had about the mind and how it works, right? We've been able to map certain experiences, certain conscious states to biological processes. I mean, we can inject you with certain substances and then decrease your awareness, right? That's how you go into an operation with anesthetics. We can give you certain drugs and literally change your mood, change the way you think, make you more attentive. We can stimulate certain parts of the brain and cause you to have certain memories or cause you to have certain desires. So, in terms of questions regarding how the body relates to the mind, how brain states correlate with mental states, I mean, we've discovered a lot. But David Chalmers calls those sorts of problems easy problems of the mind. The really hard problem of the mind is a problem of the mind itself. just like we saw in the story. The really hard problem is how can immaterial things create awareness? How can something that doesn't have awareness, sand, stones, rocks, pebbles, dirt, how can that get pushed together and rubbed up against each other to eventually create consciousness? How is that possible? Another way of looking at this, the hard problem, is to ask, why does subjective awareness, why does awareness at all, consciousness, have to exist? I mean, why can't we be walking around and have behaviors and react to our environment without some sort of internal feeling of it, without some sort of awareness and subjectivity about it, right? So, I mean, you can take a rock and kick it and throw it, or poke it, and then it'll react to you, right? It has a behavior in a sense, but it's just reacting to the force you're exerting on it. That's a behavior. I mean, when we take a look at plants, we can touch them, and certain plants, we can blow on them, and then they'll have a reaction to us touching it. We'll have a reaction to us blowing on it. I mean, we could move plants and shift them away from sun, and it'll move and it'll change it'll change itself to get close to this. So it has a behavior to it. But most people don't say plants have minds. Most people say rocks have minds. Why couldn't we have evolved as a biological species to react to our environment like rocks and plants without this thing we call subjectivity, without internal feeling, without some sort of subjective awareness of what we're doing, right? That's the hard problem. Why does consciousness even exist? How could it exist based upon a physical universe alone? That's the hard problem, says David Chalmers. Philosophers have coined the term for your subjective experience of life as qualia. So we all go through our days. Right now, you're watching this video, and you have a certain experience of watching this video, right? That experience that you have on the inside, we call qualia. Right? Philosophers have termed qualia. Now, somebody outside is watching you, maybe your mom or dad or friend can be watching you, and they have some sort of perception of what you're going through, but they don't really know what's happening inside of you. They don't know how you are experiencing it, right? Your internal felt experience of what you are going through is qualia, what it feels like from the inside. Well, thus then, if we say qualia exists, this poses a really interesting question, right? Let's say I give you a series of apples in front of you. You might say to yourself, oh, look, there's 3 green apples and 1 red apple. You ask your friend, hey, do you see what I see? Do you see 3 green apples and 1 red apple? They go, yeah, I see the same thing. Do you see the same thing? Do you really experience the same thing? Think about that. The qualia question has to do with the fact that when you see a red apple, when you see a green apple, you have an internal sense of what you are seeing. Isn't it possible that when your friend says the same thing, they don't have the same qualia? Isn't it possible that they are experiencing something different when they experience green? They experience something different when they experience red. If you were to go inside their heads, maybe, isn't it possible you see something that you would call purple, right? Now, when they say I see green and I see red, that's relative to them. They're not lying, but it's just that their experience of those colors could possibly be different than your experience. How would we know? Could we know? Is it possible for us to know somebody else's qualia? One question that's a problem for materialists would be, if you knew everything about the material world, then that means you would know about their qualia, right? Because to know everything about the material world is to know everything about reality. Is that possible? Is it possible to know their qualia by knowing everything about the material world? Another major question is, well, how does this come even about? How does qualia arise out of material substance, out of dirt, out of rocks, out of sand? How is it that qualia exists? For a lot of us that grew up in the scientific revolutionary age and the modern age, we just kind of assume that it makes sense that matter could develop consciousness. But think about it, say some philosophers like Chalmers. Think about it. Well, how does it work? How could it work? How is that even possible for something that has a property like qualia to come from something that does not have that quality? So, do you think a materialistic view of the world can ever be used to explain consciousness? Do you think that a view of the world that's based upon materialism, that everything is just matter, that reality is just physical nature, do you think that view could ever explain where consciousness comes from and could ever explain somebody's qualia? Could we know about the physical universe and know your friend's qualia of that red apple? Well, philosopher Thomas Nagel says no. And he says no in one of the more popular or famous papers in contemporary philosophy. His paper was called "What It's Like to Be a Bat," okay? Published in 1974. And in the paper, he asks the question, well, what is it like to be a bat? Do you know what it's like to be a bat? Can you know what it's like to ever be a bat? Okay, so let's think about this. What do you know about bats? Okay, what do you know about them? You know that they travel at night, right? They use echolocation to sense where they're going, right? They hear stuff and you're able to navigate through the darkness because of what they hear, because it's dark when they travel. You know that they like to hang around upside down. You know that they fly. You know they're probably attracted to other bats, right? But if you knew those things, those physical facts about bats, would you ever really know what it's like to be one? I mean, what if you knew everything there was to know about the physical nature of bats? I mean, more than what we just talked about, but everything just know about the physical nature of bats. Would you ever know the qualia of a bat? Would you ever really know what it feels like? And you can imagine flying around, you can imagine hanging upside down, but what you're doing is you have a sense for what it feels like for a human to be a bat, right? But can you really know what a bat feels like to be a bat? Thomas Nagel says there's no way. There's no way you can know what it feels like to be a bat. Just like, even something that's closer to your species, you don't know what's like, you can't know what's like to be your mom or your dad or your best friend or your sister or brother. I mean, their experience of the world is different, separate from yours. You can know everything there's to know objectively about them and still not know what it feels like for them when they say, I love that song. I mean, you can love that song, but that just means you know what it feels like to you to love that song. You don't know what it feels like for them to love it. You don't know what the song means to them. They can tell you, it means like I feel sad or it makes me really happy. But does that really give you what they feel like when they listen to the song? The key here for Nagel is to say subjective experience, qualia, what you feel like on the inside, cannot be reduced to objective material substance. Qualia cannot be reduced, right? The experience cannot be reduced and explained by just matter. I mean, think about it this way. I can tell you, or you can actually just look this up, right? You can look up what beer is. You can look up the chemical composition of beer, physically how it's created. You can know everything there is to know about wheat and barley and fermentation. I'm just throwing out words. I have no idea what beer is. But you can know all there is to know about physical beer, but isn't there knowledge that's gained by drinking it that you would not have gotten by reading up on what beer is? You can be a scientist studying beer, and you can study beer for all your life and know everything there is to know physically about beer. But would you then eventually get a sense for the qualia of beer without tasting it? Can we ever reduce qualia to physical substances? Right? Do you see the problem here? This is a problem for materialists because consciousness, right? Subjective experience, qualia, seemingly is obvious that it exists because you're having it right now. You're experiencing me talking to you. You're having an experience of it. There's a qualia of it for you, right? subjective experience of it. Seemingly, it's like the thing you really know that exists is that experience. But we've just then said there's something that exists that's not material, right? We've just then said consciousness exists. We've just said qualia exists. And you can't touch consciousness. You can't touch qualia. They're subjective. It's an experience. You can't touch experiences. So if you can't reduce an experience or consciousness to matter, then you have to admit, don't you, that there's something else exists in reality, right? You have to at least admit experiences exist. You have to at least admit consciousness exists, both of which are not material. Frank Jackson wrote or presented this argument in a story. Okay, and so let's imagine that there is a scientist named Mary, and Mary is going to be learning everything there's to know about colors and light and how the eye works. And she's going to be in this house, in a room, surrounded by books and encyclopedias and computers and TV screens and monitors, where she can learn everything there is to know about the physical universe. Okay, but the house she lives in is black and white. The room she's going to live in to do her research, black and white. The computer screen is only going to show her black and white images. All the monitors in her room always are only going to show her black and white images. But here she is. She's going to learn everything there is to know about the physical universe. She's going to know everything there's to know about how the eye works. She's going to learn everything there's to know about electromagnetic waves. She's going to learn everything there's to know about refraction and fraction and whatever there's to know about vision. She's going to know everything there's to know about chemical composition of things and how different chemical compositions of matter can cause different reflections of light, which causes us to perceive different colors. She's going to know everything there's to know about the physical universe. Well, I mean, if you're a materialist, if she's going to know everything there's to know about the physical universe, that means she's going to know everything there's to know about everything. Because if you're a materialist, reality is only material, right? Well, what happens if she steps outside? What happens if one day she goes outside? Would she learn anything new? Whoa. She goes outside and she sees trees and rainbows and flowers and birds. But she knew everything there was to know about the physical universe. Yet she's amazed at what she sees. She feels as if she learned something new. She can tell you what the electromagnetic wavelength of the color red is, but when she goes outside and sees an apple and somebody says, "That's red," she goes, "What? I had no idea." Why is this a problem for the materialists? Well, because if materialism is true, the only thing that really exists is matter. And if you know everything there is to know about the material universe, then you should know everything there is to know about everything, because that's the only thing that exists. Yet here's Mary, she goes outside and she thinks she knows something new because she now has an experience of colors. But what was she lacking before then? Well, she was lacking knowledge of experience. She was lacking an awareness of red. She knew about red, but she lacked the awareness of red, the experience of red, the qualia of red, being conscious of red. Well, doesn't that then imply something exists beyond the material? Because she was able to learn something outside of material knowledge. She learned about what red feels like. She learned about what the experience of red is like. Well, then does that imply experiences exist? Qualia exists, consciousness exists, something beyond the material reality exists. What do you think? How might you criticize this argument against materialism? Does this prove then that reality is comprised of something other than just the physical? Because you are having an awareness right now, you are experiencing something right now, so that must also exist. That reality is true. It's not fake. I mean, you are experiencing it right now. It's something that you experience more intimately than anything else. Or does that prove materialism is false? Something to think about, right? Something to think about. When we go next time to our next lecture, we're going to go to some place that seems contradictory. We're going to look at an argument against materialism through physics, right? Even the term physics for something physical, yet we're going to see that modern physics, quantum physics, seems to show that reality is not material and in fact might primarily be immaterial in nature. Okay? Look forward to seeing you then.